Hello and welcome to International Coaching Federation Minnesota Chapter's Meet the Coach interview series. My name is Jen Espinoza-Goswami. I'm the Communications Director for ICF Minnesota, and today I'm excited to introduce to you Todd Fonseca. Hi, Todd.
Good morning.
We're so excited to learn more about you, Todd, and the coaching work that you bring to this world. But before we jump into that, I would love to make a proper introduction for folks who don't already know you.
Sounds great. Thank you.
Of course. Todd is currently the owner and principal at Thriving 9 to 5 LLC, where he helps individuals and organizations do exactly that. He earned his BS in electrical engineering and MS in biomedical engineering from Marquette University. As a certified leadership coach and body language trainer, Todd has helped numerous senior leaders advance their careers. Given his communication expertise and accessible, authentic style, Todd also leads numerous workshops on executive presence and maximizing impact. In addition to his successful business career, Todd is an accomplished author. He has written 2 books and several online articles, including Avoiding the Feedback Monsters, published by Deloitte University Press. He has been a guest on several podcasts, including the Schmidt List, Behavioral Grooves, and Deloitte Insights Podcast. Todd holds an associate certified coach designation from ICF Global and is a certified co-active coach. Welcome to the show today, Todd.
Great. Thanks so much, Jen. Great to be here.
Yay. So this is a benefit that all of our ICF Minnesota members have, is the opportunity to highlight and showcase the coaching work they do. So without further ado, Todd, what brought you into coaching?
Yeah, thanks, Jen, for that question. What brought me to coaching? As I think about this, I think it's 2 things. And might sound a little bit strange, but one of them is hypnosis. And the other one is the phrase you used before, executive presence. So where would you like me to start there? We can go either way.
Buyer's choice. You go ahead and let us know which one you're most excited to dive into.
All right. Oh, thanks for that. Maybe I'll start with hypnosis. For a number of years, I worked in the medical device industry and clinical research. And what I found fascinating about clinical research is the power of the mind, right? We would have to do these controlled placebo, fake pill, or fake medical device, or not turn the device on kinds of trials. And you would see people get better, not just in their mind, but physiologic changes. So I was really curious about, wow, the power of the mind is sort of fascinating to me. It can really do so many things, including, I wouldn't say cure, but make someone feel so much better just by the power of their mind. So I really started studying hypnosis a number of years ago. Got a couple of certifications there too. And 2 things that really, sort of popped out at me. One was you could do something called context-free hypnosis. That means, my client, I don't have to know anything about what it is that they're coming in for. Maybe they had some kind of trauma or whatever that they're not willing to share. Doesn't matter. As a hypnotist, you don't need to know, because the power of their own subconscious mind can really help create the solutions that they're looking for, which is obviously very similar to all the kinds of things that we end up doing in coaching. The other part about that was just paying attention. There's a lot that happens to somebody, whether or not their heart rate goes up or down, which you can see if you're just kind of viewing what's happening in their veins in their neck, or other things. Just to really pay attention to those nonverbal signals. And whenever you see something of change, continue to sort of probe that or see what can come of that. And again, that was really something that helped me focus my listening skills and curiosity skills that eventually helped me into hypnosis and into coaching. The second piece is around executive presence. About the same time, I was really interested in the sort of clinical research piece. A lot of times what we have at the company I used to work for was talking about different talent in the organization and how they can grow into their next level of their career. And I kept hearing a lot of feedback about one particular person around executive presence, right? They don't have executive presence. I'd ask the question, all right, I understand the words, but what does it really mean? And people struggle to sort of define, well, what does executive presence mean? And one person even commented on the short sleeve plaid shirts that this particular person used to wear. And like, great, well, I can change out their clothing, but that wasn't it. So that really got me down the path of studying nonverbal communication and the power that nonverbals have on your presence, but then also what you're picking up from other people. Eventually, these 2 things together, along with Ann Hauser from the ICF, when I worked with her, she said, Todd, you'd be really good at coaching. So I think all of these skills really brought together for me, and then the suggestion from Ann to get into coaching, which spent a number of years ago and really haven't looked back.
That's awesome. And for those of you who don't know who Todd is referring to, Ann Hauser, she's the past president at ICF Minnesota, and she's a great connector. So if you don't know her, I've actually interviewed her also for Meet the Coach, but she has been like critical for our growth here at ICF Minnesota. So much love to Ann. And I will link to her video interview below this one as well, in case you missed your interview or are not subscribed to our YouTube channel. So Todd, that's really fascinating that you bring up this idea of using hypnotism, looking at body language and nonverbal communication, and how those also translate into executive presence. So if you had to define executive presence, what do you think that would be?
Yeah, so great question. I was asked this question years ago in a different podcast, and one of the concerns I think that people have, or that I share around executive presence, is what are we teaching people to do when it comes to executive presence? Especially if you read different books on this. Here's what it is, here's the definition, and here's what that looks like and shows up as. And frankly, I think a lot of times what it is showing up as an old white guy. And that's not at all what I'm trying to do when I'm talking to people about executive presence or confidence or how they show up. And I see this a lot when people get reviews within their organizations about how they show up. And the suggestions are pretty cookie cutter around what that really looks like. And at the end of the day, if you think about the different leaders that we have around the world who are, I'll call them successful because they've risen to a certain level within their companies, they're all can be very different. From various different backgrounds, different personalities, and different styles. So I think at the end of the day, what executive presence is owning who you are in the room and having that confidence that, you know what, I'm going to show up authentically as me. It's really easy to say, but what is that person? Because so many times when we're trying to show up, we're doing exactly that. How do I show up today? What does that look like? What do I need to put on for this different environment that I might be into? But there are ways to do that. It's what I work with my clients on, really being confident in who they are and then bringing that to full force whenever they're in whatever situations. Now, those can vary, right? I used to tell, and I still tell some of my clients, especially those that might have children, maybe they had to go talk to their fourth grade class. Well, the way they show up at their fourth grade class for their kids, probably a little different than when they show up as in front of the CEO, but doesn't mean that they're not the same person. So we have so many different aspects. And so how do we tap into the right ones for the right context, but still be authentically you?
So in part, some of the executive presence concepts that you introduced for showing up as your authentic self, perhaps not as that white guy at the front of the room as a CEO, and also attuning to what the environment is that you're standing up in front of. So that can also lead into what authenticity looks like within that particular environment. So I think those are really good ways to add to the conversation of executive presence. I also have studied body language from an investigator standpoint because I used to be a certified fraud examiner. And I'm noticing you use a lot of open palm types of gestures when you're talking, which is a good technique, especially if you're a speaker as well. So just thought I would point that out. I'm noticing your body language as well as we're going through this interview process. So I appreciate how you're showing up as the leader here in your own coaching work.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Speaking of your coaching work, tell us a little bit more about who you work with, what type of coaching you offer, and what the structure of it looks like.
Yeah, so mostly corporate executives or those in middle or moving up into management, and usually falls into three different areas of focus that people reach out to me for. And the first is around, we've been talking about this, and I dropped the word presence and instead use sort of executive mindset and imposter syndrome, because the two seem to go together a lot of times when people are moving into new roles. Maybe they move laterally, maybe they've jumped a couple levels, whatever it might be. But everybody has that feeling of imposter syndrome, and then it really affects the presence, like we were just talking about before. That comes from this mindset of, I don't know if I belong here. And so how do we tap into the fact that, hey, yes, you belong here, and yes, you own the space. Regardless of how much experience you may have, you're going to continue to grow in whatever roles that you have. It's fine to say, look, part of owning it is, I don't know how to do X, Y, Z, but can still own that feeling and be able to show up with confidence and authenticity. So the first part's really around that. I think the second one, and these can be related, is around burnout and fulfillment. So a lot of people have been in the roles for a number of years, and they start to feel that feeling of just burnout. All I'm doing is working. By the end of the day, I come home, I've got nothing left for myself, family, spouse, kids, whatever it might be. And I think that there's a belief at some point in time that's just how it is. And what I work with people is first to recognize that, where are you on sort of that burnout spectrum. There are some free tools that folks can use. But then also, well, maybe the choice is to make a change, but maybe it's just finding a different way to do what you're doing now and still get that energized, fulfilled feeling at the end of the day. I mean, imagine being able to come home from work and be energized instead of drained. And I would say for the clients I work with, it's about 50-50. Half of them end up going, you know what, I can get that here. I just need to tweak this and that. And for other folks, it's like, no way, right? I'm going to have to make a change and make a pivot. So that's the second group. And then really the third group is around this sort of storytelling of public speaking, right? How to become a leader of energizes, influences, and really engages and inspires those that they're talking with. So I help folks a lot with public speaking, especially when it comes to storytelling, how to get people to go inside their own mind, really understand and appreciate what it is that's happening through the story, make it real for them, and then how do they channel that into the work environment. So those are the three sort of themes, I guess, that I work with folks.
That's very cool. And of course, I resonate with the last one you mentioned because I'm a professional speaker who helps other people become professional speakers. Yes. So there's a lot involved in that, not just the technique of public speaking, but also how you stage yourself on your stage and your body language and all sorts of other elements, storytelling, transitional phrasing, things like that. So there's a lot involved there, which could be its own business. I know it's certainly part of my business. What I really appreciate about the coaching work that you do and what you shared is you help folks develop an executive mindset. So those folks who feel like perhaps they're struggling with imposter syndrome, or how did I get here? Where is the validation I need that I actually belong here in this space that I'm occupying right now? So that's really important if that's something that you're struggling with, something to consider. And also this duality between burnout and fulfillment. Like, you don't have to choose one or the other. There's a path between those two, and you help guide folks in that path. So I love that you shared all of those things. And I can see some of the challenges that your coaching clients would have. Now, can you share with us a short, maybe case study or example of someone you've worked with and how you've helped them on either of those levels with executive mindset, fulfillment, or even public speaking?
Yeah, thanks for that. One that comes to mind for me when you ask that question is an individual who fell into a category a lot like what I just described, been at the same role for a number of years, felt like they deserved to move forward, but maybe they weren't pushing that agenda and maybe waiting for that to happen for a whole host of reasons. One of them was around, for this particular person, safety was really important. And safety in this context meant, having revenue coming in, being able to support their family, so on and so forth. So by maybe pushing too hard, would she be risking potentially the safety and not being able to move on and so on? Anyway, it was interesting. Like most coaches, we did a lot of values work and, where do these things show up? And initially she said, wow, I have all these divergent interests that make no sense whatsoever. In fact, I think she had used the word like, am I just flighty in my career or what have you? And we worked on, well, what do all these things have in common, right? Or what are some of the underlying characteristics? And I would still remember her coming in. So after a weekend, because we had a session on a Friday and she came back on Monday, and she comes into my office just aglow, right? You've had that happen with, clients who are like, oh my gosh, here's how it all makes sense. And then she got on my whiteboard and she's drawing, here's all these connected. Oh my gosh, it totally makes sense now. I'm not flighty, I'm this, and this is what's important to me, and so on and so forth. And it was like a couple months later, she decided, after years of living in the same state and so on and so forth, she just quit her job, took a new job, a promotion, clear across the country, new house, new life. I mean, she totally hit the reset button. And, it's been years later and she's still texting me and here's what I'm doing now. And this has been great. And been, all those types of things. So it's just, what that's like for coaches. You're not generating any of this stuff. You just ask a couple of questions, right, for people to go inside and really create that space for them to inquire for themselves and to come up with those solutions on their own and be able to then have the confidence. One of the great things I think about coaching too is accountability. And this was a particular person where, during the session, she had mentioned to me that her son really wanted to see a particular athletic event at a stadium that was going to close. And, that they wanted to do that in the future. I'm like, great, let's do it right now. let's get on the computer, let's order tickets, and we'll just do it. She's like, now? I'm like, yep. So they bought tickets to this event during our coaching session just to get her to that action mode, right? It's going to be scary. Then did it, had a great time. They sent me a selfie from the stadium when they're at this particular event. So just showing people, hey, and you're okay, right? You live, not only you lived through it, but it was amazing. And so just that one example, I think, helped propel them forward to continue to sort of take those steps of, I can have both. I can feel safe and take risks at the same time. So many times I see people come with these false dichotomies, and they're just that, right? You can actually have both can coexist at the same time.
That's awesome. Thank you for diving more into a particular case study, because I think those are really illustrative for our listeners. And if you're new to this series, I encourage you to look back at some of our other Meet the Coach interview series, because we have a wide variety of coaching flavors and ways in which we use these powerful questions as coaches to unlock a different level of our clients. So I'm excited to hear more details on how that worked for your client. Now, you mentioned earlier that you help your clients with some free resources, and we'll be sharing your website links later on. Is there a specific resource that you would like to share in terms of you find very helpful to use or refer your clients to in the work that you do?
Yeah, there's so many. There are occasionally podcasts that I put forward, some that I've been on behavioral grooves. I like behavioral science because it helps people, especially if they're more academic in the way they like to think about things. I'll tend to send them more towards like the Daniel Pinks or, Kahneman kinds of things. And then there are some that are a little bit less academic that, people find helpful, whether it be somebody like a Tim Ferriss or, folks of that nature who have some really interesting guests. I think the tool that I tend to use a lot with a number of different clients is in the space of really understanding how they're using what I would call an energy audit, right? So where it's really energizing for you throughout the day, and what are those activities? Some of that can come from values or whatever, but then to create basically this 2x2 grid. Hey, especially if you're talking about fulfillment at work, what's really valuable for the company on one axis, from not valuable at all to really valuable. And then the other axis is energizing. It's really energizing for you as a leader, an individual, a coach, or whatever, to what's not at all. And just seeing where their day sort of lands. And you find out pretty quickly that there's a lot of stuff that falls into this lower left-hand corner. It's really not that valuable for the company and is not very energizing for the particular person. And so, of course, we go on this journey of, well, why are we spending time doing that? But more importantly is in that other category of, hey, here are the things that are super energizing for you, and they're incredibly valuable for the company. And especially the folks that I'm dealing with at higher levels in organizations, they've got a lot more opportunity to job craft. So how can they job craft where they're doing a lot more of the stuff that energizes them and is incredibly valuable for their company, whatever those things might be, and it's very different for every person. And there might be things that are really valuable for the company, but they don't like doing it. And they're in positions to frankly delegate or grow people in those spaces that are energized by those. So we spend a lot of time in sort of that right-hand part of the 2x2 that I just described. And then, really questioning the lower left hand, right? What can you really get rid of, or what has to be done? And does it really have to be done if it's not valuable, and so on and so forth. And then outside of work is that left-hand upper corner of what are they energized by but it's not really, the company's thing. So how can they get that somewhere else? So that seems to be a tool that people resonate with quite a bit, because it's easy to quickly see, wow, that's why I'm so depleted at the end of the day. I'm spending so much time in the stuff that de-energizes me, and frankly is sometimes valuable for the company, but mostly not, and being able to reimagine their day.
Thank you for sharing the energy audit. It sounds like a really good tool, and it's a 2x2 grid you mentioned, which is probably really easy for folks to visualize, to put things in different categories, and to identify how it helps them move forward. Or like you said, they can craft their job in such a way that they can do more of what they like and less of what they don't, delegate or grow someone else within the other tasks that perhaps are not their strengths, which, I mean, all of us can benefit from using a tool like that for sure. Now, we mentioned in your biography earlier that you are the author of 2 books, and I know one of them is called Avoiding the Feedback Monsters. Or I'm not sure what the other title of your book is, but what would you like to share with us a little bit about those books, and or how we can use those books to, develop ourselves?
Yeah, thanks for that. So the Feedback Monsters was actually an article I wrote for Deloitte University Press. And really what that's all about is understanding how do people show up when they're going through some kind of feedback session, both as the one receiving the feedback and then the one who's also giving that. So there are different quote monsters, if you will, that sort of show up in throughout each one of those. And then depending on what they are, how should you maybe lean in a little bit differently so those monsters become more like friends along the process. So that's really I think it's powerful for anybody. Well, frankly, everybody's getting feedback every day. And even if you don't want to call it feedback, you're getting judged every day. And so it's probably feeling like that. And you could probably leverage that just a bit. It's a quick read. It's just I think it's 7-8 pages, something along those lines. You can Google it and it'll show up immediately in a Google search. One tidbit that I like to give people too is, especially if you want feedback, not everybody's always willing to give it because they're feeling, back to my word that I used before, they're feeling like they're judging you. And so what I found really clever, and I learned this from another individual, Kurt Schmidt, and he said, leverage the word advice. Because if you ask somebody for their advice, you actually end up getting feedback along with a whole host of other really great things that they're going to provide you with because it's their advice. And they give it freely. So it's almost like you get a both and along the way. Does it feel like judgment, either by receiving it or the person who's now giving you advice? And the other interesting thing that happens when people give you advice is now they're sort of invested in the success of your outcome. With feedback, it's kind of like, all right, I told you, it's all on you. But with advice, I kind of got to own it because I'm telling you, this is what I think is going to work. And so as you go on this journey of using that advice, you can always come back and say, this worked or this didn't, or here's what I found. They'd be like, what? Now they're going to continue to sort of be your advocate and help you along the path. So I know, interesting tidbit that just a subtle word change can have such a big difference in both how something's received and how something's provided, and then the ownership that comes along with that, whoever's giving it. As far as the books go, the books have nothing to do with coaching. They're actually 2 middle grade fiction books that I wrote a number of years ago. So if you have middle schoolers who are interested in sort of science fiction books, you can look them up on Amazon. You can just search my name. The first one's called The Time Cavern, and the follow-up's The Inverted Cavern. Or even if you're an adult and you're like, I want to have a little escape here for a little while, there you go. A little middle grade fiction for you.
Awesome. I'm gonna have to check this out because I'm a big sci-fi fan. I love all sci-fi, and I do have a middle school kid. So
Perfect.
I mean, school is coming back in session soon, so perhaps it'll be something you should be into. So thank you for sharing more about that. And I love the idea of, the most dreaded question in the world is, can I give you some feedback? Because right away we go into a negative space in our minds. We're like, oh, great. They're going to say everything that I sucked at. I hear this a lot too when I'm giving people feedback on their presentation skills. They'd be like, oh no. That's why I'm hesitant to even offer feedback. I offer insights, questions, things like that. I take a coaching approach to it, of course, but it is a difficult thing to ask for feedback, let alone start that conversation. So I like this idea of, can I get some advice? Because as you mentioned, there's a little bit of a different approach to that, a little more buy-in. It's just a win-win for everyone involved in the situation. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Now we get to the point where we talk a little bit more about how ICF Minnesota has helped you as a coach. Tell us a little bit more about your experiences here with ICF Minnesota.
Yeah, thanks, Jen. So it's been a few months. My friend Jim Willenbring, who's also on the board, somebody I used to work with, he suggested, hey, you should become part of this, right? I'm like, awesome. So I have. And what I found already, I think I've been part of 3 different sessions in the brief few months, that y'all have on a monthly basis, I think, or maybe even more frequently. Learning the Indian traditions around coaching, I think, was very interesting. And so it brings yet a different perspective for each one, maybe another tool in the toolbox. And it's also a place where you get to be with your people, right? I mean, and that's the best part, I think, with coaching is, you sort of find your coaching people, if you will, and people thinking along similar lines. And what I really appreciate is I meet different coaches as well. I think there's a lot of similarity. There's also so many differences in approach or reasons why, or some of the questions that you've asked. And what I found when I either get coached by or work with other coaches is that each one of them becomes like a little team member now inside my head. Oh, how am I going to channel my Jen, voice now in this, or whatever it might be? And you just continue to grow, and it's just really been really fun. And you also get some continuing education credits along the way. So I've been filling those in for my ICF recertification. It'll be up in a couple of years, which is really easy to do. And you get all the documentation and up you go. So it's it's a win-win-win, I think, hopefully for everybody.
Awesome. And we appreciate how involved you've become in the short time you've been a member here. We appreciate that you dive right in and you're like, I'm participating in this, I'm participating in that. Because as a coach, especially if you do only one-to-one work, I don't know if do you offer group coaching as well or just one-to-one?
Oh yeah, thanks for that. Actually just started doing some certification work on team coaching in ORSC, which is Organizational Relationship System Coaching. And so hopefully in the future, doing some team coaching here, especially for those that may be dealing with conflict and really leaning into that space. So
Wonderful. So still doing one-to-one work, but you're opening up your skill set and your toolbox to include teams and groups, which is very exciting. But I think what a lot of people who are new to coaching don't understand, especially if they are working under their own umbrella. I'm self-employed, so I don't have a company that I'm working for. I have to get all my own clients. It's very lonely work. And unless you're connecting with other coaches, you don't really know what other coaches in the industry are doing.
yep.
Unless you have mentors or teachers or someone who is coaching you, you don't really know what other coaches are doing, which is why I find these interviews so enriching because I'm learning so much. I learned about positive intelligence. I learned about ORSC.
Yeah.
I learned about all sorts of methodologies and tools and the energy audit. I mean, these are things I wouldn't have learned if I was just putting my head down and coaching my clients. So thank you so much, Todd, for sharing all of the wonderful things. Before I let you go for today, I want to get to the best part of each interview we do here with Meet the Coach, which, if people have gone to your website, which check out below this interview here, I'll put all the links for how you can connect with Todd. Todd, what is your preferred place to hang out online?
Yeah, probably two places, either through LinkedIn or you can reach me through my email address. So
perfect. I will make sure all of that information is now in the show description. So please make sure you connect with Todd. He's very open to connecting and he's very friendly. But before we let you go, and I have lurked on your profiles to see what you put out there in the world because that's kind of what I do as I prepare for my interviews. But what are 3 things that a person just getting to know you may not know based on what you put out there publicly? So 3 things we don't know about Todd.
Oh my goodness. Okay. All right. Let's number 1. Wow, interesting that I'm going to share some of these things. The first would be that growing up for a number of years, I was a competitive accordion player. I used to travel around the US and all that. So there you go. Yes. Number 2, love to play disc golf. So I don't know how many people have played disc golf, but we in Minnesota here have the opportunity with a lot of really great courses. And unlike regular golf, it's not that expensive. In fact, many of the courses are free or you're paying like $4 or $5 to go golf. So great exercise. It's an opportunity to spend with my kids. I have 4 boys. So a number of them like playing disc golf. So it's a way for us to spend some sort of father-son time together. One more B. We already talked about the fact that I wrote some middle grade fiction books and I got hypnosis, which not everybody knows about the hypnosis thing. Yeah, I don't know, like to travel. There you go. Like anybody else, so not that interesting or exciting, I suppose, but love to travel and going to Olympic National Park here in about a month or so. So looking forward to that.
Awesome. Well, I have to say, I've never heard of competitive
accordion.
Yeah, I didn't know that was a thing. So that is very curious. When did you stop doing that?
Oh my gosh. So I actually started in the 2nd grade. So go figure. And then I quit when I was a junior in high school because this was it was pretty high level competition. So it just sounds really weird. But you spend so much time doing, you don't have a lot of time to do everything else. So I had a number of other interests. So I quit so that I could go I did some acting in high school and tennis and some other things. So yeah, it was great fun. I haven't played it in decades, so I'm not even sure I could anymore, but I actually have it in a closet somewhere in the house. So there you go.
That's awesome. It's funny because some of the other folks I've interviewed from ICF Minnesota here are also musicians or create music on the regular. So I believe Bethany Kurbis and Nirav Sheth, they all have a music background as well. So you probably have a lot in common with them in terms of the musicality involved and the discipline involved in just playing and creating. And you obviously have a very creative nature, Todd. So it has been a pleasure getting to know you. Thank you so
Thank
much
you.
for showing up here and sharing more about the coaching work you do. If you are listening to today's episode of ICF Meet the Coach and you are an ICF member, we invite you to reach out to me and be interviewed. We would love to interview you. This is a benefit for members only. So you do have to be a current ICF member to benefit from this service. If you are unsure of your executive presence on camera and are a little nervous about that, it's okay. You can work with Todd, you can work with me, or you could just do a written interview. We are open to either video interviews or written interviews. And I will put my contact details below this video description, so don't hesitate to reach out to me. My name is Jen, and I'm the communications director, so I'm happy to interview you. But in the meanwhile, stay tuned to our website and join us at our next event. And in the meanwhile, Todd, thank you so much for the conversation today.
Thank
I
you.
look forward to sharing more about you in the future.
Thanks, Jen.